One out of every 3 Tiger crews did not die from the shell that hit them. They survived the impact. They heard it arrive. They felt the steel flex and groan around them, and then the air itself turned against them. The Tiger was designed to make its crew feel invulnerable. Its armor promised safety in a world defined by violence. Its gun promised dominance over any battlefield it entered. Yet when the protection failed, even once, the interior of the tank became a sealed, fuel-soaked chamber where survival was measured in seconds, sometimes less. This is not a story about bravery or failure. It is not about victory or defeat. It is about a machine built to endure violence, and the human cost when that endurance was finally, inevitably exceeded. The reason so many Tiger crews burned is not found in a single flaw or design error. It is buried in doctrine, logistics, metallurgy, production decisions made under pressure, and the unforgiving physics of war that no engineer could fully anticipate. The Tiger entered the war late, heavy, and feared. It was never meant to be common. German planners did not envision it as a mass production weapon that would flood battlefields in overwhelming numbers, but as a corrective, a surgical answer to the shock of encountering Soviet T-34s in the summer of 1941. Those early encounters on the Eastern Front shattered assumptions that had guided German armored thinking since the fall of France. German anti-tank guns struggled against sloped armor. Panzer III and Vieh models were outclassed in both armor protection and gun power. Shells that should have penetrated bounced away harmlessly. Crews watched in disbelief as their weapons failed. The Tiger was the response to that humiliation. Thick vertical armor measured in centimeters rather than millimeters. A high-velocity 80mm gun adapted from anti-aircraft use, and the fundamental belief that if a tank could not be penetrated, it could dominate any battlefield through sheer survivability and firepower. On paper, the logic was sound. In testing facilities against static targets, it was devastating. The Tiger's frontal armor could shrug off most Allied weapons at combat ranges. Its gun could destroy enemy tanks before they could close to effective firing distance. In controlled conditions, with adequate fuel and supply, it was exactly what German armored doctrine valued: decisive, overwhelming firepower delivered by a highly trained crew operating from a position of near invulnerability. But doctrine is clean. Doctrine exists on paper and in lecture halls. War is not clean. War is mud and smoke and desperate improvisation. The Tiger was heavy, nearly 60 tons of steel, engine, ammunition, and fuel. Its weight strained bridges that had supported lighter vehicles for years. It overwhelmed transport rails designed for different loads. Recovery vehicles struggled to tow disabled Tigers from the battlefield, often requiring multiple vehicles working in concert. Its operational range was limited by fuel consumption that shocked logistics officers accustomed to lighter tanks. Its mechanical reliability suffered under mud, dust, extreme cold, and the constant vibration of movement. Every kilometer a Tiger moved demanded planning, spare parts that were increasingly difficult to obtain, and fuel that Germany increasingly lacked as the war continued. And inside the Tiger, behind the armor that inspired such confidence, were men. 5 of them: commander, gunner, loader, driver, radio operator. 5 human beings in a steel box designed for killing. They trained together for weeks, sometimes months. They drilled for coordination, for precision under fire. They practiced engagement sequences until they became automatic. They learned range estimation by instinct. They were taught to trust the armor that surrounded them. They were taught that distance was life, that staying beyond enemy range meant survival. What they were not taught, because no one truly understood it yet, was what happened inside the tank when that armor finally failed. Penetration was not a single event. It was never simply a hole appearing in steel. It was a chain reaction that unfolded in fractions of a second. When an Allied armor-piercing shell struck a Tiger and punched through the hull or turret, the first danger was not fire. It was fragments. Steel spall broke loose from the interior face of the armor, shearing away at tremendous velocities and slicing through the fighting compartment at speeds comparable to bullets. Paint vaporized instantly from the heat of impact. Rubber seals burned. The shockwave from penetration slammed against lungs and eardrums with concussive force that could rupture organs. Even without ignition, even without a single flame, crews could be incapacitated instantly by the violence of penetration alone. But the Tiger carried more than steel. Its ammunition was stored along the hull sides and floor, arranged in vertical racks for easy access by the loader during combat. There was no wet stowage, no water or glycol jackets surrounding the propellant charges to suppress fire. No fluid barrier existed to absorb heat or prevent ignition. The propellant charges that launched shells toward enemy tanks were sensitive to heat, sparks, and the sudden pressure changes caused by penetration. A penetrating round that did not strike ammunition directly could still scatter burning metal fragments throughout the compartment, igniting propellant charges stored meters away from the point of impact. The engine mounted behind the crew ran on gasoline, not the diesel fuel used by many Allied and Soviet designs. Gasoline fumes accumulated in enclosed spaces with poor ventilation, especially in tanks that had sustained damage to their fuel systems. Fuel lines ran forward through the fighting compartment. Hydraulic fluid, used in turret traverse mechanisms, misted under pressure when lines ruptured. The Tiger was a machine designed for power and protection, not for containment of the fires that power could ignite. Once fire started inside the crew compartment, it spread with a speed that survivors later struggled to describe in coherent terms. Survivors spoke of a sudden brightness filling their vision, of heat that stole breath from their lungs before they could scream, of smoke that made eyes useless in moments, that burned throats and blinded men trying to find escape hatches they had used 100 times in training. The interior of the Tiger had narrow escape hatches that required specific body positions to navigate. The turret hatch opened above the commander and loader. A hull hatch existed for the driver. Under ideal conditions, tank level, crew uninjured, no fire or smoke, evacuation drills could be completed in seconds. Under fire, with the tank hit, tilted at an angle, partially flooded with smoke, or mechanically disabled, those ideal conditions vanished completely. Outside, Allied crews were learning their own lessons through blood and fire. Early encounters with Tigers were terrifying beyond what training had prepared them for. Sherman crews and T-34 crews found themselves outranged and outmatched in direct confrontation. They fired and watched shells bounce harmlessly from Tiger armor, leaving nothing but bright scratches on steel. They learned to maneuver desperately, to flank at high speed, to aim for tracks, optics, turret rings, anything that might disable rather than destroy. Infantry learned to close the distance with handheld weapons, bazookas, piats, magnetic mines, improvised explosive charges. The goal was not always destruction, it was immobilization. A Tiger that could not move was a target that could be surrounded and dealt with systematically. Artillery could be called in with precise coordinates. Engineers could approach with demolition charges. Air attack might follow if communication and timing aligned. Every hit, even one that failed to penetrate, increased the chance that subsequent hits would find weak points and the armor would eventually fail. Allied doctrine adapted to reality faster than German production could ever hope to adapt to Allied numbers and industrial capacity. By 1944, Tigers were increasingly outnumbered on every front. They fought in defensive actions, often static, often under constant pressure from multiple directions. They were forced by circumstances and orders to hold ground rather than maneuver for advantage. Distance, the Tiger's greatest tactical ally, was frequently denied by terrain, by enemy tactics, and by the sheer weight of opposing numbers. Inside the tank, the psychological burden grew heavier with each engagement. Crewmen reported listening for impacts, counting seconds between hits, estimating angles, calculating probabilities of penetration with each sound. The loader's hands shook not from fear alone, but from physical exhaustion compounded by constant tension. The commander watched through optics clouded by dust and smoke and condensation, knowing that one successful enemy shot would change everything in an instant. The Tiger's armor could protect them until it didn't. And when it didn't, the consequences were immediate, absolute, and final. On the other side of the gun, Allied tank crews and infantry faced their own particular terror. Approaching a tiger meant exposing oneself to an 88-millimeter gun that could kill with precision at distances beyond effective return fire. Infantry crept through hedgerows and ruins and shattered buildings, knowing that if spotted by a tiger's gunner, there would be no warning shot, no second chance. Tank crews maneuvered through narrow streets and wooded terrain where visibility was measured in meters, trusting coordination, communication, and luck that felt increasingly fragile. When a tiger was finally penetrated, the relief felt by attacking crews was often mixed with immediate horror. Allied soldiers reported seeing hatches thrown open with desperate force, figures emerging briefly in flames before collapsing across the hull or falling to the ground. Others spoke of silence, no movement at all, just smoke pouring from every opening in the armor. There was no triumph in these moments for most who witnessed them. Only the knowledge that whatever tactical advantage had been gained came at a cost paid in full by men trapped inside steel, men who had families and fears and lives they would never return to. Effectiveness had a price on both sides that no one spoke of willingly. The tiger's armor forced enemies to innovate constantly, to take greater risks, to close distances that doctrine once forbade as suicidal. In response, Allied weapons became more lethal with each passing month. Higher velocity rounds were developed. Improved shaped charges were manufactured. Greater emphasis was placed on combined arms tactics that concentrated overwhelming force against individual targets. Each improvement increased the likelihood that when a penetration finally occurred, it would be catastrophic and complete. German engineers were not blind to the problem. They understood fire risk. Later designs attempted better ammunition storage, heavier protection for propellant charges, improved compartmentalization of fuel systems. Fire suppression systems were discussed in engineering meetings, sometimes installed in limited numbers in later production vehicles. But resources were scarce and growing scarcer. Production was fragmented by Allied bombing that targeted factories and supply lines. Time ran out before solutions could be implemented at scale, and doctrine remained slow to change even as evidence accumulated. The Tiger was never meant to be expendable. Its crews were considered elite, carefully selected and extensively trained. Losing one tank represented a significant blow to unit capability. Losing the crew inside it was worse. Those skills and that experience could not be replaced by any factory. As the war turned decisively against Germany, Tigers were abandoned due to mechanical breakdowns or lack of fuel. Crews destroyed their own vehicles with thermite charges and grenades to prevent capture. Even then, accidents happened during destruction. Fuel ignited unexpectedly. Ammunition cooked off without warning. The machine that once promised safety became a liability even without enemy fire. Survivors carried the memory forward into peacetime. Post-war interviews conducted by historians reveal a consistent theme that transcends nationality. Not fear of death itself, but specific, focused fear of fire. The sound of shells striking armor haunted their dreams for decades. The smell of fuel triggered memories, the knowledge that survival had depended not on skill or courage or training, but on whether the next round found the wrong angle or the wrong location. There are no heroes in this story. The Tiger was a formidable weapon that earned its fearsome reputation, but it was also a closed environment where physics ruled absolutely and without exception. When penetrated, it punished those inside without mercy. Allied weapons were effective, but that effectiveness translated into human suffering that lingered long after the battle moved on and the war ended. The statistic, 1 in 3, should not be read as an indictment of design or of the men who fought in it. It is simply a measure of what happens when industrial power, strategic desperation, and human bodies intersect inside a steel box under fire. After the war, the Tigers rusted where they were abandoned. Burn marks scarred their interiors permanently. Twisted ammunition racks told silent stories. Museums would later recover them, restore them, paint them, make them appear whole again. But the smell never truly left. Those who survived carried something heavier than metals or the weight of defeat. They carried the memory of heat, of smoke, of the exact moment when the armor failed, and the war entered the compartment with them. In the end, the Tiger did what it was designed to do, until it couldn't. and when it failed absolutely and without compromise. That is the hidden cost behind the legend. Not the kills claimed or the armor thickness measured in millimeters, but the quiet knowledge that for many who trusted its protection, survival ended not with impact, but with fire. And for those who walked away, the burning did not stop when the hatch opened.